ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Shocking evidence, jury drama and witness cross-examinations. The Mushroom Case Daily podcast took you inside one extraordinary trial. And now we're back with The Case Of, where we report the in-depth detail of how Australian criminal courts work and who's in there each week. And we're starting with the case of the croc wrangler, Matt Wright.
Mr. Wright denies any wrongdoing.
To hear more, search for the new podcast, The Case Of. It's on the ABC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
A massive military parade in Beijing recently revealed just how advanced China's weaponry has become. It even has an intercontinental ballistic missile that could hit key US military bases in Guam. So, what does it tell us about our own military purchases and direction? Today, Global Affairs Editor Laura Tingle on why we might need a rethink. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Laura, recently China had this huge military parade in Beijing. So what we're going to do with you is really look at what was on show and what that says about our own military capability. But first, that parade, it really was incredible to watch, wasn't it?
It was incredible to watch, Sam. I mean, those of us who are a bit older sort of remember the big marches through Red Square back in the Soviet days, and they sort of had a real air of foreboding around them. And such marches are a bit of a thing amongst totalitarian regimes. China's sort of was no exception to that. Mao used to stand there back in the day, but this was next level just because it was such a statement of China's arrival as a major military power.
An extraordinary display of China's military might. Xi Jinping flaunting the newest arsenal in his war kit.
Along with the music and marching, a message from the government that China has arrived and is building a military to rival its competitors.
Yeah, 10,000 soldiers marching in unison alongside nuclear-capable missiles. It's quite the sight. And really, Laura, it dwarfed, didn't it, Donald Trump's military parade that he put on earlier in the year.
Well, it did, and it made it look all pretty pathetic, basically, which I'm sure was the intention.
Every other country celebrates their victories. It's about time America did too. That's what we're doing tonight.
They were never going to be anywhere near the sorts of spectacle that you saw in Beijing, just because the land forces now of the People's Liberation Army are so big, and all of that drilling that goes in, which you'd never get people in a democracy to be doing to quite the same extent, or goose stepping and things.
Yes, of course. All right. Well, Donald Trump said they were hoping I was watching, and I was watching.
And I was watching. My relationship with all of them is very good. We're going to find out how good it is over the next week or two.
Do you think, in part, this was a show for Donald Trump?
It's always very distracting, isn't it, when the President of the United States makes it all about himself. Yes, it was probably a bit about him, but I think it was directed at the US in general, because, of course, everything that's happening there isn't just about Donald Trump. It's about the Congress and the institutions basically falling in behind him. And I think without a doubt it was a message both to him and to the rest of the world that China has arrived, and that, you know, the thing that the Chinese have been trying to say for decades, which is, look, you know, we deserve a place in the universe as well as everybody else. You know, the time has come. And the sort of weird thing is about this parade is that it would probably not have caused as many shockwaves for a lot of people if it wasn't for this sense that it's happening at a time when America is stepping back anyway, which is the sort of weird thing about Donald Trump's comment.
All right, so just remind me what was on display, just how sophisticated is China's military hardware at this point?
Well, it's very sophisticated. I mean, there are two things about what we saw going down the main drag there in Beijing. One of them was that a lot of it was naval-based power, whether that be air power or surface-based power or submarine power. China's had this massive army to fight land battles, but it's built up a huge capacity of naval assets now. So that's the first thing. And I think the other thing was you saw this escalation in the technological sophistication of it. Not only were there a lot of nuclear missiles, and I think a lot of analysts have tended to sort of be a bit dismissive of China as a nuclear power. I mean, it's been a nuclear power for a long time, but it's sort of never sort of quite rated as having as many weapons as the US and Russia. So people haven't been as focused on it. But it wasn't just the nuclear capacity. It was this diversity of missiles that could be fired from land, sea and air, a lot of technology which is drone related, and of course that's the new thing as we're seeing in Ukraine at such a sophisticated level, and of course a lot of unmanned or uncrewed vessels, both in the air, on the water and under the water. And this is, the really big development which people have been seeing coming along, but, to actually sort of see it there, I think was a big shock even for people who watch this closely.
And so really the parade, it did show, Laura, that China is catching up and catching up quite quickly with the US capabilities when it comes to military. It's not there yet, but it really is moving very quickly.
Well, I suppose it depends how you measure it, Sam. In some ways you can say it's still behind the US, but if we're talking about the most likely confrontation between these two superpowers in the short term, it's over Taiwan if the Americans decide to get engaged there. And it would suggest that China has massively superior power to the Americans in circumstances of a conflict over Taiwan. I mean, the Americans have to come all the way from America to fight the war over water. It's not quite so far for the Chinese to come. And I think without a doubt, it wasn't just a message of, look, we're here now. It was a message of, I hope you're looking at this, United States of America. What we're telling you is don't even think about it if we decide to take over Taiwan, because, we've got all of these resources and we'll essentially blast you out of the water before you even get here.
All right, so Laura, part of this build-up has a lot to do with Taiwan. It's also, as we said, about sending this message to America. Another way that message was sent, of course, was by the presence at this parade of the Russian and North Korean leaders.
One of today's striking images is President Xi Jinping with Russia's President Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un.
It was handshakes and laughs all around, wasn't it?
It was, and I think that's sort of another layer or level of this. There was a lot of commentary after the parade and after all the handshakes and backslapping and the presence of the North Koreans and the Russians there, along with others, that we were now seeing the new world order. Well, I think, yes, that's true, but it's not a question of a new world order that's just built around those particular countries. I think it's a new world order in the sense that we're seeing this splintering of this sort of unipolar, bipolar model that people have sort of described for the last, 80 years. And we're seeing this sort of multipolar order. Now you've got China taking sort of number 2 place at the moment and rapidly becoming the number 1. But without a doubt, the North Koreans and the Russians are now much closer than they once were. North Korea's boosting Russia's war in Ukraine with weapons, and they both benefit from being seen to be in league with China, though I think you'd have to say all 3 countries have slightly different ambitions in life. And of course, Donald Trump mystifyingly has managed to completely alienate India, who decided that they might as well come along for the ride as well and just send a message.
Yeah, because in a sense, Trump is actually bringing these autocratic leaders closer together, isn't he? Partly through his trade sanctions.
Absolutely. India is the most spectacular example of it, but even countries in, Southeast Asia, some countries, in Central Europe, they're all being hurt by the Trump tariffs. and by a lot of the language that we're seeing from Donald Trump. And, in Africa, the cuts in aid have sort of seen a lot of African countries further strengthen their ties, which were already strong with China. China's played a really big hand in Africa for some years, but, all of these actions only facilitate China developing a lot more alliances right around the globe.
Okay, well, Laura, let's have a look now at what Australia should take away from what the world learnt from watching that military parade in China. We have, of course, this major deal for nuclear-powered submarines as part of AUKUS, the US-UK military alliance. And the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, announced on the weekend a $25 billion investment into shipbuilding facilities in Western Australia.
It is an AUKUS facility. Now, ultimately, where the United States really will maintain their submarines is a matter for the US. But we absolutely anticipate that this will be a facility which is available for them. It's in the context.
But tell me, is that what we actually need, looking at what China has?
Well, I've got to say, it seemed to me, and a lot of the analysts I spoke to, who mostly are, not necessarily against nuclear submarines, but, have deep concerns about AUKUS as a strategic position. I mean, there are a few things that come out of this. Of course, there's the underlying erosion of confidence in the US as an ally under Donald Trump. The question of the strategic sense of AUKUS in the short term, that is, having nuclear-powered submarines that are sort of deployed for a forward defence strategy in the South China Sea, when, we might have 3 of these things on the water at some point, possibly in conjunction with whatever the Americans are doing, against this massive arsenal of Chinese weapons. So it raises the question of, do we want to be getting involved in a fight in Taiwan, which has been a question which, a few years ago, I think Peter Dutton was still saying, of course, we'd go to war over Taiwan. There's now a concern that, the indications from the way Donald Trump's conducting all of his foreign policy around the world, that it's questionable whether he would be going to war over Taiwan. And if that's the case, that starts to erode the whole forward defence strategy in the short term. And then I think also it raises questions about, should we be spending so much of our defence budget at the detriment of things like more personnel and more missiles and things, investing so much in this one idea of nuclear-powered submarines, on the basis that they might actually turn up one day, when we may be much better off just focusing on defence of Australia issues, which of course was the dominant strategy sort of from the 1980s onwards.
And not to mention, Laura, that while we are ordering, I think, almost $2 billion worth of these unmanned ghost shark drones, a lot of what we're getting will be manned. And we can see from the Chinese parade that that might not be the way to go.
Well, that's certainly what everybody is thinking, that it's going to be unmanned, because apart from anything else, if you've got a manned surface vessel, you have to spend a lot of investment in those vessels being able to defend themselves and their crews, whereas unmanned vessels is a completely different question. And we saw a lot of unmanned surface vessels that look a bit like frigates and things in the Chinese parade. So it changes all of those military equations, I think. And once again, the speed with which this is happening, Hugh White, the long-time military defence analyst, was saying it's a bit like sort of investing in cavalry going into the Second World War. It's redundant. It's going to be completely left behind. And, while the rest of the world's moving to things like drones and unmanned technology, we're still galumphing around with this other stuff.
Okay, so Laura, where do you think that leaves us then? If we can't rely on the US under Donald Trump, of course, do we just need to have an entire rethink about the path that we're currently heading down? And do you think perhaps the government will do that?
Well, it looks to me like they probably have to have a rethink for, just given the speed with which our understanding of the US alliance is changing and the technology is changing. Will we have one? You just can't see where the push for change is actually going to come from, because we've had so many rethinks and reboots particularly on submarine strategy. and almost all of them have been a bit of a disaster. So it's hard to see how that will happen, what the catalyst will be. I suspect it'll be one of those things where something happens. It may be Taiwan and the fact that America doesn't go and therefore we don't go. And as a result, the sense of crisis in our region will be such that it really galvanises people into a completely different national strategic debate.
Laura Tingle is the ABC's Global Affairs editor. This episode was produced by Jessica Wukyanov and Sam Dunn. Audio production by Cinnamon Nippard. Our acting supervising producer is Sydney Pete. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.